What makes Christians argue and fight with one another? James asks this question in James chapter 4, and he's going to show us that whenever there's conflict between Christians, we need to go back and look at our own hearts, that the external conflict tends to be a result of something that's going on inside our own hearts. Look at verse 1. It says, "What causes quarrels and what causes fights among you?" This quarrels and fights, if you look at the word for quarrels, it's actually a word that a lot of the time is translated war. So this is really strong. It's talking about between two people, a really strong argument and anger between two people. And specifically, it says among you. Remember that James is writing primarily to Christians. So he's talking about Christian brothers and sisters being at war with one another. This is not how it's supposed to be, right? But even today in the 21st century, there's tons of infighting and arguments going on between Christians. Maybe in your own life, you have a brother or sister in Christ that you are angry with, that you argue with, and that you are in a fight or a war against. And this is not how it's supposed to be. And James asks the question, what causes that? Why do those things happen? Well, he says, "Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you?" Again, that war terminology. This is high-stakes stuff, and he's talking about your passions. That he goes on, he says, "You desire and you do not have, so you murder. You covet and cannot obtain, so you fight and quarrel." These passions, these are desires for pleasures. And he's saying desire and covet here, these are things that God warns us about, to not covet and to be content. And yet, there are desires in our hearts that are waging war in our hearts, and that can overflow and cause us then to be at odds with other people around us. And again, he uses really strong language. He says, "You desire and do not have, so you murder." Now, I don't know that he had a problem with the Christians that he's writing to are actually killing each other. I don't know that that's actually the case, but he is using strong language here as if the arguments happening between Christians are destructive. And they have the potential to destroy lives. We need to be careful of this and watch out for this, because whenever we are arguing or at war with other Christians, it is a destructive thing, but it's coming and it's flowing out of something that's happening inside of our hearts. Now, these desires and this coveting, it may be for physical things that we wish that we had that we don't have. It might be for something that's not physical, but something more like attention or popularity or maybe love or something like that, that we have a desire or a covetousness for something. There's something inside us, and we're fighting because we don't have something that we want to have. We're fighting each other, and then he says that we tend to do it before we even talk to God about it. He says, "You do not have because you do not ask." You haven't even talked to God about this issue, and yet you're going to your brother or sister in Christ and fighting about it. And those who do ask are doing it wrongly. You ask and do not receive because you ask wrongly to spend it on your passions. So this idea of coveting desires and passions, it's all coming down here. And even whenever we're going to God to ask about it, our hearts are not right because our hearts are at war with desires within us. So when we find ourselves bickering and angry with other Christians and fighting and at war with one another, we need to stop. And we need to look in our own hearts and say, what war is happening in my heart that is causing this? What desires and passions are waging war in my heart that is making me take this out on the person in front of me? In the end, our desires ought to reflect the desires of Jesus' heart, right? And the way that we approach conflict in the world ought to reflect Jesus. And remember that Jesus humbly submitted himself to God in everything, and that even when he was going to the cross, he told God, "Not my will, but your will be done." And then he treated the people who were treating him terribly, the people who were beating him and spitting on him and sending him to the cross. He was asking God to forgive them. That's not the heart that we see in ourselves a lot of the time whenever we are arguing and when we are fighting with other Christians. If you're fighting with a brother or sister in Christ, we need to turn to our own hearts, examine it, and see what is the desire that is fueling this, and how is it different from the heart of Jesus, and how can I conform my heart more to the heart of Jesus?